everybody. Can you hear me? Okay, good. My name is Janine Culligan. I'm the director of the Eleanor D. Wilson Museum here at Hollins. And I am the lucky one that gets to introduce Kyra Schmidt tonight. But first of all, if you will, please silence your phones. I just wanted to let you know that Kyra is going to be talking for about, 45 minutes, and then there will be Q&A, and then we have a reception that follows the talk. And the museum will be open till 8 p.m. So I hope you will join us for the reception and in the museum. It's my pleasure tonight to introduce Kyra Schmidt. Since 2019, Kyra has been the Visitor Services and Programs Coordinator for the Eleanor D. Wilson Museum. But she's also a practicing artist. In 2015, she received her BFA in photography from the University of Southern Indiana in Evansville. And she got her MFA in photography from the Savannah College of Art and Design in 2017. Kyra's work follows a historic lineage of landscape photographers while rejecting traditional methods in favor of experimentation and ephemerality. Kyra has exhibited her work nationally and internationally, including the SCAD Museum of Art, the House of Lucy in Los Angeles, Candela Gallery in Richmond, Edition 1 in Santa Fe, New Mexico, Gallery 621 in Tallahassee, the Lu Shu Photography Festival in China, and her work has been published in Ain't Bad magazine, Beta Developments in Photography, and she was, in 2017, the top 50 photographer by Critical Mass. Her first handmade monograph was published with Dust Collective in the fall of 2019. The same year, she had a residency at the Banff Center for Arts and Creativity. Kyra is also a teacher and was an adjunct art faculty member teaching photography and other art courses at Armstrong State University in Savannah. And since 2019 and currently, she's taught art history classes as an adjunct assistant professor of art at Virginia Western Community College here in Roanoke. She was editor of Ain't Bad magazine from 2019 to 2020 and is currently an entrepreneur, founding and co-owning Slackwater Press. I truly don't know how Kyra has the time to do all that she does. And she does it with generous grace and aplomb and a no-nonsense attitude, all of which kind of belies her serious philosophical way of looking at the world. So, museum professional, check, professional artist, editor, teacher, entrepreneur, and now I'm happy to say that she can add curator to her resume. I'm so excited with the exhibit she's organized, accompanied by a catalog designed by our very own Laura Jane Ramsberg, and I hope you'll grab a copy when you're in the museum. The exhibit and the catalog were sponsored in part by the City of Roanoke through the Roanoke Arts Commission, and we thank them for their continued support. And now it's with great pleasure and admiration that I introduce and turn the mic over to Kyra Schmidt, who will talk about what photography is. So please give a warm Hollins welcome to Kyra.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to go lights out so you can see the big, beautiful, colorful images tonight on the screen, and we'll turn the lights back on with questions at the end. Before I dive in, I want to, of course, give my thanks. I'd like to thank Roanoke City and the Roanoke Arts Commission for making this exhibit possible, along with its corresponding workshops. I'd, of course, like to thank the 10 artists that agreed to be part of this exhibit, especially those artists that have taken their special time to do a workshop or lecture in conjunction with it. I'd like to thank the Eleanor D. Wilson Museum staff, Janine Culligan, for the lovely introduction, for inviting me to curate this show and for trusting me to do so. Laura Jane for being my soundboard for all my worries and fears, my excitement, and for creating beautiful exhibition catalog. And of course, Janet Cardy, who all of our beautiful exhibition installations would not be possible without. She's our preparator. And finally, Mary Zampetti for being just as excited as I have been about a photocentric semester at Hans University. I have to tell you, I'm used to discussing my own work. I've yet to have the responsibility of giving a lecture about the work of other artists. So tonight I'll endeavor to do everybody justice through my words and ideas. Much of my lecture is going to discuss the genesis story of this exhibition, why I brought these artists together, and why I think they're making important work. And as a byproduct, I'm going to show you lots more work by each of these artists. What I'm not going to do tonight is sink too far into the theoretical rabbit hole of what photography is or is not, but I am going to share with you some of my musings on why I think photography is such an alluring, magical, and complex medium. Oh, there we go. I wanted to plug this before I really dig in. Amy Elkins, one of the artists in the exhibit, the one that does the large grid of cyanotype portraits, is going to be doing an artist talk on March 31st at 6 p.m. It is Zoom only, but the museum is going to live stream it in back 119 if you want to be in person. Amy makes a lot of amazing work that extends past her cyanotype portraits. She does work about incarceration and masculinity. And I definitely encourage you to attend. The Zoom link is on my.hollins, or please just email us if you need it. The next few slides are going to be installation images of the exhibit. I know we're going to walk around the corner after this and see it, but we have a Zoom audience that can't see it in person, so this is for them. As I began making this lecture or PowerPoint, I had the realization that what this exhibition is to me is my own personal and, or at least my very first love letter to photography, and being able to curate this exhibition and bring together art that inspires me has been incredibly fulfilling. Janine couldn't have asked me to curate a more fitting show. And for the next 40 minutes or so, I'm going to talk to you about how much I love photography, but it's my hope that you'll find some inspiration or curiosity in the work and the ideas that I'm going to present tonight. And bear with me, I might need a couple water breaks. To offer you a little bit of background information, this exhibit, excuse me, is a byproduct of a year-long cyanotype community project that the Eleanor D. Wilson Museum had undergone, or tried to, and that I had the privilege of piloting. The project was exactly as the name sounds. We, the museum, sought to collaborate with local youth in the city to set up a series of collaborations involving hands-on workshops, museum visits, and it would have ended with an exhibit of the students' own experiments in the museum. Unfortunately, due to COVID, the project had been halted once again. But up here on the screen, you can see some of the images from that workshop at the high school, which was a lot of fun. Cyanotype photography is a very forgiving process and not too high tech. So we coded the cyanotypes in the low light of the classroom. Students got very creative. They painted owls. They used old slides. They printed transparencies. They used everything they found, and we just exposed them on the windowsill. But you can see some of those examples. So with that, this exhibition came out of thinking about that group of students that I'd be working with and that would be visiting the museum, and what sort of breadth of photographic experimentation or inspiration I could offer them. Then this also led me down the path of thinking about the teaching power of images and how I rigorously believe that images on all sides of the spectrum of photography carry this with them, this power to teach. Thinking about even the abstract images and the representational. This ability to let us feel or phenomenologically experience the world in a different way. My ideas about photography are very romantic, I'll warn you. I also believe that, that this is what makes photography as a medium so unique. Its ability to relate our bodies back to us. If you read my essay, you might have noticed that I talk a lot about this idea of truth, or uncovering truth through images. Maybe I even overuse it sometime. My friends might say I'm very obsessed with it. When I talk about truth in photography or art, though, I'm not referring to truth in a factual sense. Certainly the opposite. Photography is perhaps one of the most magical and cunning mediums out there. It's really a trickster. I mean, at this point, it's come back from the dead at least 4 times since its invention. Okay, I got some giggles. That's my one photography dad theory joke for the evening. So I'm discussing truth within the scope of this exhibit, not as something that's factual or is represented or rendered correctly, but as an opening up, creating a space where something new can be experienced, felt, or discovered. Through the use of sleight of hand, experimentation with the medium, even experimentation with other mediums, this exhibit opens up, the artists in this exhibit open up a space that allow us to consider that which would not have been otherwise possible. By utilizing the power of photographic experience and materiality, these artists confront larger issues surrounding race and gender ideologies, ecological grief, and the passage of time. So what photography is, for me, encompasses a strange and alluring essence of photography as a medium that can uncover truth. It's in alignment with the sheer wonder and excitement I experience with close-up magic, a term or a connection that has been justly erected by the curator, Charlotte Cotton, as a way to describe the almost indescribable sensations we have with works of art, its ability to move us. And this is her book where she introduced that. It's a great book and she's a beautiful writer. What the exhibiting artists have in common is a focus on the experience of the viewer, this idea of guiding and slowing down the attention of the viewer as a way to alter our encounter with a work of art. Certainly, the artists in this exhibition properly address their connection with a contemporary audience who are likely also contributors to image culture in some way, as are we all. Moving into my first artist, I'm going to get through all 10, so bear with me. I'm going to move pretty quickly, but we'll have time at the end for questions. If you've seen the catalog, Julie Wilson here, if you've seen the catalog, you might have noticed my thanks to Julie Wilson at the end for setting or inspiring the trajectory of this exhibition. I began with this work knowing that Wilson is also interested in opening up or creating this new space for thinking about the world. In her case, about text and image, and the way they can work with or against one another. She's creating these very large scale photographs with a 4x5 view camera. Her process itself involves slowing down. Wilson is reassembling and dissecting language to combat the contemporary climate of information-driven screen sharing with imagery that eludes direct interpretation. So things don't always make sense in her images. The text doesn't always align, or maybe the text in the image. The images in this body of work strive to subvert the idea of text and image directing interpretation by placing them together and linking them with uncertainty. So she's trying to break the logical binds of language and open up this space for critical thinking. Wilson is also interested in breaking down this information screen sharing culture that assumes that what you see and what you read is truth or factual. We all know how it is, or most of us know how it is, to become lost in the black hole that's scrolling on Instagram or Facebook or the news without necessarily taking the time to consider what we're taking in. Rather, she is considering how we can turn this ubiquitous, overwhelming flow of words and images into something new and into something useful, but not just into something different, into something that can defy certainty and disrupt the binds we place on language, binds that often oblige language and images to label the world and define experience. So this work is trying to break our minds out of that program, that binary box of thinking about things as being right or wrong, this or that, black or white. Through her stream of conscious way of image making, she She creates these unfamiliar associations and opens up a space where one can make new or unexpected connections, even have their own poetic experience with a work of art. This series is titled, "It's Impossible to Say Just What I Mean," a line keenly borrowed from a poem by T.S. Eliot titled The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. The poem is an examination of the tortured psyche of the prototypical modern humans, so overeducated, eloquent, neurotic, emotionally stilted. After twisting through, and I definitely recommend reading it if you haven't, after twisting through these succulent, complex, almost absurd lines of the poem, the protagonist eventually declares that there is just no language to describe his true feelings. And I think that's exactly what Julia is trying to communicate with this work. So the quote. Moving to our next artist, Emily Margaret Mason. She's also opening up new, interesting, and poetic spaces. She represents her own photographs that have been meticulously cut and reassembled to suggest that the natural world is not just to be seen, but to be felt. Found objects such as rocks, plastic tarps, other photographs layer each of her compositions. The delicate complexity of each image is a result of carefully chosen compositional elements that unfold temporarily in the viewer's mind. So an upside down photograph, a broken mirror, a crumbled print, all of these elements causing one to slow down. We see bits and pieces of objects and images that we recognize in Mason's work, but we're denied the typical view of the sunset on water or the textured rock, which I think we see here. Instead, they're broken up into unique and uncertain forms. By collecting, cutting, stacking, and reassembling, she asked one to consider the way that we automatically perceive the natural world, or even take advantage of it, again, trying to break the program of traditions that define our experience. Mason is exploring how the multifaceted nature of experience might emotionally manifest by consuming the viewer with a sense of wonder and curiosity. Some of her work more recently even expands into this post-photographic, a sculptural or a three-dimensional realm, further asserting the presence of the photographic material and challenging what a photograph can be. And here's one more of her images. A sculpture of a photograph of a sculpture of a photograph on a photograph. I love that. Also filled with wonder is Megan Reipenhoff's non-representational cyanotypes. Here's an image of her chronograph. This is chronograph number 1, the exact chronograph that we have now in the gallery. Typically, Megan's chronographs are exhibition-specific books. So with one page or folio for each day of an exhibit, it would be turned each day. The books end up being cumulative records of the environment. Pages would change throughout the day. They would respond to the light in the gallery, the weather, time. The cyanotype pages are then never fixed. Their fugitive nature pointing to impermanence and the ever-changing nature of her complicated relationship with the environment. Before I change the page, I'd like you to take note the chronograph in the exhibition is displayed as a book. So here we can see it has so many possibilities. It could be the star shape or spread out as almost pushing into this sculptural realm as one continuous image. Also, please take note of the color. I don't know, but I believe that Megan made these images just before it was on view in its first exhibit, or maybe just after. So here's what it looks like now. You can see the change. What's also very interesting about the pages of the chronograph in the gallery is that they're filled with the earth, physical earth matter, from the artist dipping the cyanotype coated paper into water and dirt, laying it on ice and so on. Megan is creating these indexical anchors of time and place, yet the visuals stand apart from traditional methods of representing the landscape or the natural environment. So from preventing the spectator by automatically perceiving their encounter with the land in this traditional way, these works too guide one to slow down and to experience the materiality of the photograph in new ways. And certainly one of these ways just being the pure beauty of the material in the process. Excuse me. One of my favorite statements by André Bazin, a renowned and influential French film critic and film theorist, captures, I think, this work perfectly. In his book titled The Ontology of the Photographic Medium, he further defines the photograph as being a separate object. He talks about the photograph as an extension of the presence of an object rather than the mirror of reality. And for me, that's exactly what these images are doing, uncovering a space to reconsider how we look at or perceive the world around us. They're not just mimicking the landscape, but showing us an alternative and still very real part of it. Even more interesting, she never wholly processes the images, as I mentioned. They continue to change over time with the environment, and they have a never-ending life cycle. So what you see here on the screen is the same cyanotype that has been photographed throughout its changing process. A quote from Megan's own words, I think, describes this work well. She says, "Perhaps we're the fugitive cyanotypes are analogies for a terrifyingly fleeting and beautiful existence. The process of rephotographing them is a metaphor for the incorporation and mediation of photography in contemporary human experience." I would say that what Megan is trying to do with this work is not so different than what Julie Wilson is breaking down text and image, or Emily Margaret Mason reorganizing our visual landscape. Though side by side, their aesthetics are drastically different. And one more from her, in this very fluid way that these cyanotypes come into existence, they really take on their own primal language. The ice crystals form naturally on the paper, as you see here. The rain falls naturally on the paper. So in this way, for me, rather than being prescribed by language or categorized by it, they sort of become their own. This is work by M. White. Just as in Megan's work, the material itself is overwhelmingly present in M. White's photographs. She was actually here yesterday for a tintype workshop. Thank you, M. M is also exploring personal as well as collective relationships to landscape, illuminating intimacy and connection in a way that visually stands apart from Megan's more abstract cyanotypes. White approaches the landscape genre using a mix of 19th century and contemporary processes. So she's combining analog photography, very hands-on processes, with digital technology. This is a grid of 18 small tintype photographs that's up in the gallery. It's absolutely stunning in person. The title Glittering Plain, we might assume we're looking at the sun's reflection on water. However, through the materiality of the tintype surface, its unique bubbles, scratches, its sheen, its brooding intensity out of the dark background, they really begin to transform into faraway galaxies, or even a portal that transports us to another place. M described this image she posted this image online and described it with her own words days after I wrote those initial thoughts I just shared with you. And what she said was beautiful. She said, she described it as a feeling of transcendence one can experience while watching sunlight shimmer on the surface of water. I think this is a beautiful description. More than describing the visible surfaces of water, the works swirl together to express an emotion or feeling and to create a new sensory experience. In M. White's 2021 solo exhibition titled High Water at Candela Gallery in Richmond, she beautifully created this immersive installation combining the historic ambrotype process with newer technology, or newish technology, in the form of a projector and light boxes. By making the equipment visible, the materiality of both the ambrotype process and the light box is foregrounded for the viewer, reminding us again that the photographic object is more than just a window to the world. I wanted to show you one more image by M. White. This is a separate body of work. It's a simple still life with a dogwood branch and blooms. With this delicate white background that she's chosen though, you can really begin to recognize the nuances of the wet plate collodion process. Specifically this bottom corner of the plate that almost looks like water or sand, that's the collodion. The wet plates process involves a huge number of manual steps, as we found out yesterday. It's a very physical process. One of the steps involves coating it with a syrupy substance called collodion, then making it light sensitive by dunking it in silver nitrate for a few minutes. But what's really magnificent about this process is the way that the light sensitive coating images itself onto the plates. So and this is a detail of that dogwood, the top corners. So when M releases the shutter to take this image of the dogwood or the water, the collodion substance also transcribes itself onto the image. It truly photographs its own essence, having very real and material effects, and once again, marking itself as more than just a mirror of reality. Switching gears now just a little bit. Also in my essay, I talk about the theme of representation within the exhibit and how it's used by each artist to create instructional images that could guide or teach. There's an emphasis on a reusing of materials or images or archives to create meaning. We saw Julia Wilson reusing, reorganizing familiar languages and images. Emily Margaret Mason, reassembling and rephotographing her own work, and Megan Reipenhoff, repurposing natural earth matter. This is a very recent, fun, and mighty little publication by Carmen Wynett, who, if you don't know, makes excellent work. She's a great curator and writer, and she makes great work about archives. She made a few small but mighty statements in this little book that really brought the idea of the exhibit and these artists full circle for me when I was thinking about this presentation and how I wanted to talk about the work. Here are some of the statements or the questions she presents within her book. Can photographs confirm or deny existence? Do they project their own desires and meanings? How do we relate to images? Photography as a window, eye, or mirror, all things that it's been called before, feels uniquely suited to this charge, but even more in its ability to show us that which is here or there, that which has been and is, and also to capture that which otherwise would not have existed. Artists Amy Elkins, Sama Al-Shabi, we're getting through them, and Clea McKenna and Nikki Klepper represent portraiture to assess how their own archive of images and objects can contribute to collective memory and culture. Amy Elkins conflates several issues through this overwhelming grid of cyanotype portraits created during indefinite isolation. This is the installation of them here in the gallery, beginning with her very first cyanotype portrait she ever made, moving across and down like a calendar. This isn't even half of them. Each day during the global pandemic, beginning, I think back in like March 2020, so at the very beginning, she would repurpose a different object found in her apartment, latex gloves, toilet paper, tangerine sack, takeout boxes, to create a self-portrait. The items in the portraits would shift as the pandemic blurred into an unknown stretch of time. Elkins made one of these portraits every single day for over a year, so there are 377 total. Through this repetitious ritual, each portrait more than the next comes to resemble that of a martyr with weary and tired eyes, bearing the weight of an unknown future. Elkins says of the project, the portraits became less about those initial fears and more about confronting the boredom, anxiety, grief, and fatigue of living in indefinite isolation during a global pandemic. Elkins would share one of these portraits every single day on Instagram during the pandemic. I actually followed this entire series, and I can remember when she posted the very first one. There are even certain images that really stood out to me in my memory because I must have seen them on a particularly notable day, good or bad. But the series really began to speak to me when her page became, and my feed became inundated with cyanotype after cyanotype, this overwhelming grid of information. And in this way, for me, the art piece begins to extend beyond the grid on the wall It was a way of life, a happening, and a shared experience. Elkins mentions in her statement that this process and series was only made feasible due to the materials she happened to have on hand, so cotton pre-treated with cyanotype chemicals. What's magnificent to me about this is that although the images are very poignant themselves, it's really this collaboration between cyanotype blues that flicker like a fever dream, the fraying fabric unraveling before our eyes, and this personal ritual that we're now able to bear witness to that brings this work full circle. This is also in the gallery. So this series for me represents a very profound and beautiful moment where process, material, and artist all came together to create a work of art that speaks in one way or another to the experience we've all shared these past few years. And this is a detail so you can see that the unraveling edges of fabric that will theoretically keep unraveling over time. Similar to Elkins, Sama Al-Shaibi utilizes self-portraiture to assess unequal power relations between the West and the Middle East. She amplifies Western stereotypes that were portrayed in early 20th century photographs that would frame Oriental women in exotic fantasy as objects. Excuse me. These historical images from the late 19th and early 20th century would often feature lounging females draped in ornate textiles, stylized with obligatory props such as water vessels. These pictures painted an exoticized idea of the Middle East for a Western European audience, and many were used in postcards and widely distributed. Here's two images, not by Sama. These are images from the 19th, 20th century, both by Marcellin Flandrin, a French, originally French war photographer who created many nude Orientalist postcards of Moroccan women. Flandrin was influential in creating the stereotype of the Arab African prostitute, young, brown, exotic looking to the European eye, topless, wearing robes or caftans. Most of the photographs, of course, were carefully staged. The images in carryover replicate these historical images in complex ways. Each features a female figure wearing costumes and posing with a symbolic prop. The props are larger than life, and with them she aims to amplify the physical burden of their unjust representation by exaggerating these props carried overhead. Al-Shaibi is also using the same historical processes of the era, albumin prints, photogravure, and gum oil, further connecting the historical with the contemporary. Her images bring attention to the various kinds of contemporary hardship women face and their individuality. The true genius, though, of these visually soft works is that it takes a deeper concentration to read the sheer activist stance embedded within each of these images. In Justice, this image here is in the gallery. The female protagonist gazes directly at us. On her shoulder is a scale of epic proportions, as if she's questioning the historic injustices of women, but also history and the realities of the present that impact everyone living in Al-Shaibi's homelands. Broken governments, the lack of the most basic resources such as water, and shaky policies on human rights and women's rights. Al-Shaibi says of this portrait, dressed in all white, the figure depicts the Herculean task of surviving conflict. The implication is that the subject is not only the bearer of the absurd and the irrational, but conversely that in her total isolation, she is transformed from an object of passivity into an active body that sustains and supplies oneself. She is inscribing through her own body a mechanism of survival. Beautiful image. Differing from Al-Shaibi's reclamation, we're moving on to Nikki Klepper of the Historical Oriental Postcards. The artist Nikki Klepper uses silver gelatin lumen print to explore the significance of vernacular photographs and natural specimens as aesthetic objects and cultural artifacts. For Klepper, these are personal images that of deceased loved ones. The overlaid flowers are a symbol for the way in which we commemorate the dead, and the photographs are the memories we hold on to. Klepper's lumen prints in the exhibit are unfixed, meaning they're going to continue to fade and change upon exposure to light. This ebb and flow mimics the way in which our brains hold on to and process memory. In this way, the work draws our attention to the complicated relationship between photography and memory. Do we remember our past? Or is it the photographs that we've seen so many times that retain, influence, and shape these memories? Much of Klepper's work uses photography to challenge these preconceived notions of the past, something that Al-Shaibi is also doing with her self-portraiture, and many of the other artists explore as well. By expanding on these archives that are derived in fact, whether it be cultural or personal history, Klepper uses the medium to urge us to consider that while a photograph is a sufficient way of remembering how something once looked, it's impossible for a photograph to articulate the entirety of its history. In other words, archives aren't always derived in fact. One more image by her. In the same vein as Klepper's lumens prints that are pressed with faces and flowers from the past, Clea McKenna breathes new life into forgotten women's textiles by physically pressing them into the surface of the photographic paper. She creates these detailed, what she's calling photographic reliefs with these garments from the last 2 centuries. Objects that carry a very rich legacy of touch, from the labor of their making to the signs of wear. Not portraiture in the traditional sense, so each thread paints a portrait of its maker, and it's pressed into a new and strange reality on the surface of the paper. So here we see fraying fibers unraveling. Embroidery, they imprint their flaws into the photographic paper in crystalline detail through physical touch. So the process itself involves the artist embossing these by hand or with a large etching press, like a printmaking etching press, onto the paper. The cracks you see here extending from the garment are from the photographic paper physically folding in on itself. Yet even when used in this crude way, letting it tear and crack under the weight of the press, photography has a gift for describing reality in strange detail. So here again, in its ability to show us that which is here and that which is there without the medium wouldn't be possible. Instead, this process reveals nuances beyond what one's eyes can confirm and invents new marks. Here, in the way that this textile was embedded into this piece you see on the screen, it begins to take the form of almost a primal script, like cuneiform, poetically transcribed onto the paper. While this work seeks to memorialize the history and maker of each textile, it also transports us, highlighting the material of the silver gelatin photograph and the material of this ancient garment in a haptic way. Describing photograph as being a physical trace of their objects is presumably the medium's special privilege. To make a contact print or a photogram, objects are placed directly onto the surface of paper. So indeed, the production of a photogram requires real and object to begin as one single merged entity, but these objects have to be removed in order for the photographic trace to be recorded. In this way, the photogram can capture evidence of a novel kind, recording both the object and the act of setting it aside. So we're actually talking about a surprisingly complicated maneuver here, one that gives photography its enticingly magical quality, the quality that we witness in Mary Zompetti's cameraless photographs of decaying life. These cameraless photographs are created by exposing film to environmental conditions over extended periods of time. Wind, rain, ice, snow, they all alter the surface of the film's emulsion, cracking it, pulling the emulsion off of it, leaving time and place specific impression. Bodily fluids putrefy on the surface of these deteriorating effects are recorded onto the silver emulsion. Both delicate and resilient, the surface acts as an imprint of these fragile bodies and a map-like record of time and place. Here, like in Klepper and Reipenhoff's work, we're witnessing photography's unique ability to freeze a lapse of time into a single static moment, enabling us to consider and relate to the world in previously unachievable ways, pushing the photograph to its limits. The pops and cracks on the film make us acutely aware that we're looking at an object, at a photograph rather than through it. It also makes us aware of us, ourselves, of our own looking, of the extent to which the exchange of looks between us and this surface is what brings the image to life. In other words, this is where truth in an image comes to the fore, in the moment of looking where the artist, the object, and the viewer come together. The origin of truth in the work of art belongs to both the preservers and the creators. One more image if I may. The last work I have to share with you tonight, but certainly not the least, it's Cyanotypes by Emily Sheffer that brings us full circle. Much of Emily's work with cyanotypes reimagines photography's historical narratives, often in the form of handmade books. They retell the story of photography's origins with delicate and ephemeral imagery. Like Zampetti, Sheffer is also embracing the strange reality of photography's ability to capture time passing. This is an accordion book by Sheffer that captures the winter solstice. So in 2017, during the shortest day of the year, she made a cyanotype of the same image every hour of daylight. As the day passed, the cyanotypes faded and eventually disappeared. So this book not only captures an ethereal portrait of a winter's day, but it records photography's lightness, illuminating its limits at a point where light runs out. It was Roland Barthes, the well-known philosopher of photography, that described photographic time, among other things, as involving a revolutionary or unprecedented type of consciousness. Here's a similar book by Sheffer, but of the spring equinox, and a cyanotype exposed for all 12 hours of daylight. Here you can see the form of the accordion books takes. It's a fitting format, when expanded, presenting one continuous image. Photography, according to Barthes, gives us a this will be and a this has been in one and the same representation. This piece by Sheffer, titled Eclipse of the Sun, does just that. It shows both the time lapse of an eclipse and retells the story of some of photography's early practitioners. A quick description taken from Sheffer. In 1854, Philadelphia-based brothers, William and Frederick Langenheim, made 7 daguerreotypes of the total eclipse of the sun, the first eclipse visible in North America since the invention of photography. Under the light of the same eclipse in August 2017, Emily recreated these images with cyanotype paper. So 163 years later, images made by the light of one eclipse were reprinted by the light of another. And here's that in book form. Sheffer's work with cyanotypes poignantly presents photography's history as one that has come full circle, as I think by the work of all these artists in the exhibit does. In each of these cases, we're forced to look at or better with the photograph rather than through it. In the context of this exhibition and the presentation of work by each of these 10 artists, I hope that I've been able to present a way of thinking about photography in a way that persuasively accords with the medium's own undeniable conceptual and historical complexity. In conclusion, what photography is a celebration of an absurd, magical, and didactic medium. It invests in the teaching power of all photographs, even when the method is evasive or metaphorical. The artists in the show breathe new life into ubiquitous image culture by investing in photography's ability to expand vision. Before I end this presentation, I want to open it up to questions. I want to include a disclaimer that each of these artists are making very interesting work that extends beyond the scope of this exhibition I've put together. So if you enjoyed somebody's work, I encourage you to look them up, even reach out to them, because they're making and doing amazing things. And thank you.
Questions in house for Kyra? I think something that is really interesting about photography is its ability to be continuously surprising, and so I'm curious in your ability to curate this exhibit, if there's something that kind of just surprised you.
Oh, so many things. What's so unique to me about a photograph is that The digital, you know, when you're looking on a screen, doesn't do the physical object justice. So a lot of things surprised me about curating this exhibition, but namely it was seeing the objects in person and their materiality, which we often don't think a photograph carries. Yes. There were so many. There were so many, and you know, 10 could even be a lot for Wilson Gallery, but it's so hard to narrow it down. There's so many people making great work out there. I think I started with like 15 and then narrowed it down to 10.
And how do you find it?
How what?
How do you find it? How do you know what's out there?
I look at a lot of images. I mean, Instagram can be a demon, but also a great tool. Most of these artists I probably discovered on Instagram or in grad school. I was able to have the work in the show of a lot of my grad school heroes. So that was really amazing. Anything from online?
Yes. William Glazer is asking, how in your opinion does photography fit into the larger art world?
That's such a William Glazer question. Photography fits into the art world just as any other art form does. I think it's never really been in question, so though it's been a debate. And photography has surprisingly reinvented itself again and again in the past 200 years, or seemingly reinvented itself. So photography is everywhere, and I think that's what makes it such an interesting medium, that everyone takes photographs.
Any other questions for Kyra? I don't see anything else online.
Great.
Oh, wait, yeah. Just thank you, Kyra.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone on Zoom who attended, and thank you all. There's snacks around the corner. Let's see.